The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Hill, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Digital Assets and the vice chair of the full Financial Services Committee. Mr. Hill, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for continuing this theme of how we enhance capital formation for businesses of all sizes. And I thought this was such an interesting group of legislative proposals and such an informed, excellent panel. Thank you all for being here. Before I was in Congress, I spent a lot of time doing Reg D investments, and so I thought many of these reflected some of the things that we've seen over the last decade after the Jobs Act of what we could tweak and fine-tune even better. And on the subject of going public, look, it's just gotten so expensive to be a public company, and the liability is so high that sure, the market cap has just gone up and up and up. When I first started my career, if somebody had a $250 million market cap, they could easily be public and bear the costs, and we had more than double the public companies that we have now in those days. So that's why you see so many enormous market caps, and I think that's why you see a big incentive for so many growth companies to stay private longer. So I don't know if it's a chicken and egg thing. I take Mrs. Thornton's point. Well, I started my career in 1979, so I remember the 1982 amendments, and I know where she's coming from, but I don't think that's a chicken and egg thing. I think really it's the cost that has driven market caps up and number of public offerings down, personally. Entrepreneurs and small business folks are the backbone of all of our small towns, and I'm so glad we have Missouri so well represented here. I represent Little Rock, Arkansas, and so I work with our venture ecosystem throughout central Arkansas. And it's frustrating when you recognize that the top 20 metros in the country get 88% of the venture capital funding in the country. But due to the Kauffman Foundation in Missouri and Steve Case's evangelism, this idea of making sure that we have a venture ecosystem open to all investors of all types has really seen a renaissance in the last decade. The best ideas in this country are not reserved to the salons of Palo Alto or New York. Last year, Arkansas companies raised $107 million in venture capital funding, 3 times higher than 2020. And while that's dwarfed by many states, it's an indicative of the fact that our angel investor groups and our venture ecosystem is growing and growing successfully around the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville, and certainly in Little Rock, in and around the Venture Center and accelerator programs that we have in Conway, Little Rock, and North Little Rock. Unfortunately, entrepreneurs in many parts of the country face challenges to raising the capital they need. We just had a bill on the House floor last week that we all supported, which enhanced the SEC studying what are the barriers to rural capital raising for people who are not even in a metro area. And I think your comments on that have been very, very helpful. So Mrs. Howell, with your 2 decades of experience, both in the brokerage business and now as an angel investor, how do these ideas today directly help a startup dreamer in Kansas City or Little Rock?
Our networks are only so large to be able to raise capital from our own personal network. And if you're speaking to the fund of funds bill as one example, I can give you an example, and bringing Steve Case back up. 6 years ago, Steve Case and his whole Rise of the Rest, Come Out to the Midwest, invited 20 of us who were brand new fund managers to DC to learn from one another and support one another. And he asked us, how can we help you? And every one of us, by the way, nobody had ever raised more than $30 million. That was our ceiling in our markets. And all of us said, Steve, if you would just invest in our funds, you'd give the good housekeeping seal of approval, and then other people would understand and they'd believe it. And then we get people who've never done this before, who are accredited investors, of course, off the sidelines. So this idea of the fund of funds would be really dreamy for all of us, because there will be investors that are in other parts of the country who'd probably love to invest in Work Torch.
Thank you.
But they can't find them. And so the way they could find them is through funds like us, who are boots on the ground, finding and helping entrepreneurs.
Glad to see a Morgan State Bear here. That's good. I co-chair the HBCU caucus here in the House, so it's good to see Morgan State represented. Crowdfunding, these ideas to expand crowdfunding. Any thoughts on how you think that would benefit entrepreneurs in your world?
There are a lot of entrepreneurs who don't have networks, especially entrepreneurs who look like me. When I started my first company in 2010, I didn't know what an investor was, right? I didn't know where to go. I didn't know where to meet them. And when I did, I didn't know how to talk to them. But that has no bearing on the entrepreneur's ability to execute. And so an entrepreneur can go to crowdfunding and say, hey, I've executed, I've done well. Who would like to take part in what I'm building?
Great response. Thank you so much, and thank all of you for being here today. Yield back.